Fox News alert, a brand new photo showing the two American hostages who were released by the Hamas terrorists. Judith Renan and her 18-year-old daughter, Natalie, who are from outside Chicago, are now with Israeli forces and undergoing medical care. Mike Tobin is in southern Israel with more. Mike?
Well, Natalie and Judith Renan, judge from Evanston, Illinois, are released from Hamas captivity. They're out of the Gaza Strip. They are either at an Israeli base in southern Israel now or headed in that direction where they're scheduled to be reunited with family. Some of their family members have already been on special report expressing their hopes to get their loved ones released.
The Hamas terrorists had brought them into one of the family's house. They stayed there. The Hamas gathered them with another family, and they brought the both of them in there. And the eyewitness told us that about 30 minutes later, they handcuffed Judith and Natalie and both of the men that were there after murdering one of her daughters that was lying dead in the other room.
We're very anxious to be able to reunite them with their loved ones. We welcome their release. We share in the relief that their families, friends, and loved ones are feeling. But there are still 10 additional Americans who remain unaccounted for in this conflict. Every single one of them should be released.
Natalie and Judith were met at the crossing into Gaza or out of Gaza by Gal Hirsch. He is a retired Israeli general who was brought out of retirement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and given the task, this very difficult task, of securing the release of now 198 hostages believed to be held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It should be noted that both the U.S. and Hamas gave credit to the Qataris for striking the deal that secured their release. Judge?
All right, Mike, stay safe. Thanks so much. And the release of two American hostages might complicate Israel's imminent ground invasion. Republican candidate Nikki Haley warning it could be Hamas trying to buy time and delay.
Two prayers have been answered, and we've got 200 more to go. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say to the Biden administration is don't fall for it. What they're doing is they're going to throw two hostages out there, for one, to see if they can weaken us to keep Israel from going into Gaza, and two, because they want to see if they can get something out of it.
Okay, Jesse, I'll start with you. Why these two? There are over 200, as I understand it, hostages. Why two Americans? Why not Israelis? I mean, they had a whole group to choose from.
I probably shouldn't say it, but American hostages in terms of the international landscape, very valuable, especially when we're sponsoring the Israeli assault through these weapons transfers. They're trying to drive a little bit of a wedge here. I understand the tactic. Iran is involved. The Qataris are kind of tangentially involved, and Hamas is involved because this is the only leverage they have. They've been doing this, begging other Arabs to get involved in this assault. They're not, despite a few missiles from Yemen. And this is their other way of saying, hey, guys, you know what? If you just halt this ground invasion, we'll release the hostages. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. They could do a drip, drip, drip. And I don't think Israel right now is as concerned with returning hostages as they are with decimating Hamas. Mm-hmm. So they're going to go in pretty soon, and they're going to go in with F-16s. They're going to go with bulldozers, tanks, drones. And the infantry is going to go house to house, door to door, and it's going to be ugly. And then they're going into the tunnels, and they're going to go in with tunnel rats with knives and maybe even flood them. And the goal, it looks like, is to push half the population south into southern Gaza and create a northern, I guess maybe like a DMZ, where there's no Hamas there. I guess they kind of have control over the situation. Maybe you give it like a buffer designation. And I don't know if they're going to have time to do that. They said that they're going to do this for a year. They don't have a year, because as this ground assault develops, all of these Arabs who are angry already are going to be watching Al Jazeera in Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Lebanon, and they're going to see the devastation, the destruction, and it's going to look really bad. So they're going to mount mobs against embassies. They're going to scream into the air, and it's going to get tense. And so does the United States and does Israel Do they have the focus and the determination to let this ground assault play out no matter what the PR collateral damage is?
I just want to advise that President Biden has spoken by phone with the family of the 2 Americans who've been released. So that is a good thing. But let me go to you, Katie. What kind of intelligence do you think we can gather from these 2 women who've been released?
Well, they certainly know maybe where they were held, but they also could have been blindfolded. They were blindfolded on the way into the Gaza Strip. Clearly, they don't know exactly where they were. They may be, of course, they can talk about how they were treated, which I can't imagine the things that they went through. But they're going to need some time, too, to really think about what has happened to them, and they deserve some space. The intelligence will take care of itself when it comes to what the Israelis know, what the U.S. knows in terms of their hostage negotiation. We're grateful for their release, obviously, but it's a very low bar for Hamas, and they should be given no goodwill. And that goes for Qatar as well when it comes to this release. There, as the Secretary of State mentioned, 10 Americans who are still unaccounted for. 30 Americans were killed as a result of this incursion. And Hamas is using hostages in the Gaza Strip as human shields as a way to avoid accountability and to avoid accountability for what they've done and what they did. And the Americans need to push the Israelis to do what they have to do to get this job done. There is not a lot of time and space for this to happen. And especially if we're going to be sending in aid without any conditions of releasing hostages as well, when there are photos of Hamas using aid from UNESCO during their assault in Israel. So I hope they can be helpful in terms of giving the Americans and Israel intelligence to free other hostages, but given there's hundreds of miles of tunnels, it's going to be very difficult to use anything maybe that they came up with to find the others.
You know, Jessica, there are people who are giving Hamas credit, saying, you know, it's showing the humanitarian side, but you don't try to obliterate a people and burn people alive and kill children to go to sleep in their own beds and then suddenly become humanitarian, do you?
No, I don't think so. And I think it is important that people, when they discuss this massacre, continue to reiterate the details of it, that they pulled babies from their beds, that they gouged their eyes out, that they took grandparents who had survived the Holocaust, who needed urgent medical care, didn't care, raped women, went to a peaceful music festival, and did the most gruesome things you could ever imagine, pure barbarism. So what they did is they did something smart and strategic at this moment. Jesse's completely right. They had to go with Americans first because we are the ones that are funding all of this. We also know from past precedent that Israelis will trade a lot for hostages. They have before traded up to 1,000 people for one Israeli to come home. Now, I think it's important. There are only 15 million of us on the planet right now of Jews. 6 million of us were exterminated. Every life counts. But you better believe the terrorists know that that's how Netanyahu thinks about it. That's not how Joe Biden thinks about it necessarily. It's a different kind of game that he's playing, thinking about what's going to happen from the north. What happens, he said last night, we have to hold Iran accountable. What does that look like? We don't know yet, but we know that we're watching them and seeing if they get involved. I want to repeat something, though, from yesterday that General Pat Ryan, the spokesman at the Pentagon, said that's really important. He said, you have to trust us that we know more than you do. And that's very clear that 2 hostages are out today. Hopefully, it will increase on a daily basis, that we get more and more out, and then we can continue to squeeze them, and that they are so afraid of what's coming that they let all 200 of these people out. But people need to have more confidence in the American government and in the Israeli government that they know more than we do, and they're working day and night to make sure that these 2 is just the start of the floodgates.
And they are the experts, the American and the Israelis, Greg. And the truth is, I mean, that, you know, if you keep delaying, and what we saw, I think it was yesterday, we saw Prime Minister Netanyahu talking to the forces. It's what you generally see with any kind of leader talking to the forces before they go into war. And then all of a sudden there was a lull today because of the negotiations. When do they go in now?
I don't know. I'm no expert on military, but I do know the media pretty well. And at the Blinken presser, a reporter used the hostage release to say, isn't this a moment for a pause, i.e. a ceasefire, which, again, we can all pretty much agree is part of the Hamas plan. Look, they hold the cards. They have 200 hostages. So they might be doing this to buy time, just to get in the right place to inflict more damage. And this is part of a PR crusade to stop a ground or put off a ground invasion. We're not really that bad after all. We didn't really kill as many people as you think. And they're hoping that our media will treat it as such. The media, as we've seen this week, are really good at being used. And this is the problem and the challenge of the micro coverage of this war. Hamas exploits this. They know that we react to every single thing they do, and you have to be aware that they have an ulterior motive because they know that, which is why it's important. It's important for us and as Americans and these viewers to step back and ignore those who say, oh, maybe the threat is exaggerated. They just released hostages. You know, this is their strategy. This is their tragedy. It's good to be hopeful. We're glad they're released, but do not be naive. This moment-by-moment coverage requires an ongoing commentary that is at the mercy of confusion. Nobody knows anything, and you're right. It's what we don't know that matters, right? So I say pull back, assess with patience the speculation about first, second, or third fronts and impending ground invasions and delaying tactics and who's going to do what. Stop. Israel has decided their course. The release of these hostages is good, but then anticipate something bad, because that's war. You may think it's a humanitarian gesture. I don't think so.
Okay, we're following the breaking news on the 2 freed American hostages.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.